And that comes back to the point I was making about what happens with the existing policy for defending existing areas. So the exception test that we try and ensure that we get the additional facilities in the particular location is an important test that should not be lost.
Perhaps you could help us with the nature of the modification that you're proposing.
Indeed, yes. I think the point to just remind ourselves of it is this policy is dealing with new provision on sites. The first criticism regarding the deletion in paragraph 2 of the policy is not one that I fully accept. The intent to require consideration of open space in accordance with, in effect, deficiencies is reworded and included as part of a modification to the first paragraph, albeit much more briefly and succinctly, with a direct reference to the standards as required in the Council's evidence. So that deals with the, in effect, what would be or ensuring that local populations have the right access to a different range of open spaces in accordance with those standards. The next point relating to the second criterion of the policy in the exceptional circumstances, this again is dealing with off-site provision of new open space. The deletion of the wording was really one for clarity, to make the point simply by requiring that it's demonstrated that it can be more appropriately provided off-site, rather than the rather long-winded text that precedes those words. So the intent remains that there's an explicit requirement for it to be demonstrated that there's an alternative approach that that could be deemed acceptable. It just doesn't require, to our minds, the lengthy wording to make that point.
Put another way, sir, for you to get into that sub-paragraph in the first place, you need to be exceptional. You need to be the exception to the rule. So it is, as Ms Bartle said, not necessary from that perspective because of the way this is structured. This is already an exceptional circumstance.
Yes, I understand. Mr Natkus?
Thank you, sir. Yeah, this is comment on GI6, but also linked to an earlier session that we had with regards to one of the allocations, ST9, and it's just to sort of flag similar concerns that we had then, but actually I think it's a better time just to illustrate it now to you. So the modifications to that allocation require the creation of a new open space to the south of the site, as shown on the policies map as allocation OS9. So we have a specific policy for the site that requires the creation of new open space as shown on OS9. And if we look at OS9, in policy GI6, it says new recreation and sports provision to the south of ST9. So it identifies the use of that and its location. But it then goes on to say, well, so just above it, it says indicative new significant areas of open space have been identified in connection with the following strategic sites. And at the bottom, it says the precise delineation and extent of the new open space will be set through detailed master planning and the planning process. So policy OS9 explicitly identifies that the location of that is indicative. It's based on, like, it goes on to say that they're a guide to the general extent based on current understanding of the site, and also confirms that the precise delineation will be through the master planning process of a planning application. So OS9 has flexibility in terms of that. However, when you look at the policies map, it gives an exact delineation of where that open space should be. And when you look at the modifications to the policy SS11, it says that the open space should be in accordance with the policies map. So we can't comply with both, because if we do a slightly different amendment to OS9, which we comply with it, we're then in conflict with SS9. So it needs tidying up. this isn't an approach to remove open space in order to reduce the requirement for it. We're in the process of master planning the site now, and we understand the council want open space in that area so everyone has access to it. There's quite a number of hedgerows and trees in that area, and actually it probably make it very difficult for something like a football pitch, and it may be that a football pitch has to go elsewhere on the site if that's what's required, which then might require homes to go into some of that area in order to make up the shortfall. But it'd probably be a slight encroachment on the northern edge of it as opposed to breaching the gap, because we understand the concerns that are there, and we're looking at keeping that gap. But we just need, well, we feel that this needs to be amended just to bring them in line with each other. And I don't know if it needs to be ST9 that's amended or whether it's GI6, and I appreciate it, we're here today to raise these concerns with you, but we're happy to discuss it with the council, because I'm hoping that they acknowledge the conflict in it, and it might be that we can just get together and get our heads around the best way to do this so that we still deliver.
So Ms Bartle will speak to Mr Nattrass about his particular site and the hedgerow issue, which we don't think is such an issue, but I think we can deal with that outside. I'm not going to accept there's an in-principle conflict, though. Let me very briefly explain why. The site allocation policy directs you to provide the open space in accordance with this policy. You turn to this policy to see what you're required to do. Take the specific example as used of OS 10. Really importantly, the preceding words indicative new significant open spaces have been identified in connection with the following sites as shown on the policies map. So yes, of course you have a line on the policies map. We couldn't frankly do it any other way, a squiggle or anything like that. So, but what we've made very clear is that area we've identified is indicative. So there's no conflict or doubt about that. And then equally, when you turn to the bottom of the policy, precise delineation and extent will be set through detailed master planning and planning process. That's totally consistent with that, the fact that that's an indicative identification, and we say that's an approach that works and is effective. I don't accept there's any conflict as a matter of principle between the policies, and on the hedgerows, Ms Bartle can pick this up separately because we think that's site-specific and can be discussed and dealt with in due course.
Does that help?
Unfortunately not. Unfortunately, I have to disagree with that. I agree with everything that was just said in principle, but it's not what the policy says. The policy doesn't require us to provide open space in accordance with policy GI6. The policy for the site, SS11, requires the creation of a new open space to the south of the site as shown on the policies map as allocation OS9. So that requires us to comply with the policies map. If that policy said to provide new open space to the south of the site in accordance with the provisions of GI6, it would give the flexibility that has just been mentioned, but it doesn't. It says that we should comply with the policies map, which doesn't give the flexibility. That's the discrepancy.
We might be able to concede on the insertion of the words in accordance with GI6. Just bear with me on that one moment.
Yeah, it seems like a pragmatic solution, having just turned up SS11.
I mean, I suspect that this might be an example of us making explicit what is implicit, because if you were to follow through the logic Mr Nattrass has put, you turn to your policies map and you say, oh, well, what's this? This is OS 10, and then you look at, well, what policies in the plan deal with OS 10, and then you see GI6. Ms Bartle's just turning up the modified version of SS11.
So if it's just the council, I don't think we're going to be a million miles away on this. I think the concern is just, say for example, it moves 10 metres. And I know we're saying, yes, you would then say, well, that policy map goes back to the policy. It's just messy. And I think if an application went in that had a 5 or 10 metre deviance, it'd be very simple for somebody to say, hang on a minute, that doesn't comply. And I just think, I think we're all on the same page with this. It just seems an easy modification to make.
So, sir, can we leave it like this? We think that there are words in SS11 from the last set of modifications that deal with this. Ms Bartle will discuss them. If not, then we can insert words that we think were in there anyway, so to speak, to say in accordance with GI6.
That's very helpful.
Thank you.
I'm going to come back to you then, Mr. Merritt, and I'm sorry for sorry that we've dealt with that in the intervening period.
Just in terms of the council's response, as I say, I don't think Ms Bartle answered either of the 2 points that I was raising. You know, at the moment, in the middle of that paragraph that's deleted, second paragraph, where there are deficiencies in certain types of open space provision in the area surrounding a proposed development, the council will seek variations in the component elements to be provided by the developer in order to help overcome them. And that's, as I say, to get around the issue that an individual site may not be big enough to justify providing some of the larger facilities. If you delete that, then you are basically only left with the general standards. The council will have no basis within the plan to seek to vary that to meet what is currently covered in the policy. And coming to the second point about the exceptionality test, I don't think the council is correct in saying that's effectively covered elsewhere. If you go back to the beginning of paragraph 3, what it says is the council will encourage on-site provision, which is a very weak statement, and that is why the exception test that is at the beginning of 2 is so important. Now, if they want to cross out the exception test in 2, then the logic, if we are to get on-site provision, would be to change the encourage to require.
So, nice and easy, encourage to require, that's fine. We can change that, but leave the remaining modifications to that as is. The first point, though, I'm afraid we don't agree, because all that is required is in the words that have been inserted into the first paragraph and using the council's up-to-date open space assessment. This is like when you're dealing with 10-year MITs. You have to do it in accordance with your SMAR. Why do you do that? Well, because your SMAR identifies what sort of houses and MITs you need. And that's precisely what's being done here, deficiencies in certain types of open space. Well, how are you going to know about any of that? Well, you're going to know about all of that because it's in the up-to-date open space assessment. So we're tying it to that up-to-date open space assessment, and that will achieve it. But importantly, it means that that assessment can take a strategic view as to what sort of provision is required, because it might well be that there's a deficiency in one sort of open space, but actually simply we provide, and that's not the right strategic solution in that area. It might be that you need to tackle it in a different way. So that's why the open space assessment is the appropriate vehicle to do that.
And just to add to that, I think that sentence, as was originally included, implied that those component elements were a set of component elements that were a rigid requirement of a contribution, when in fact actually the open space assessment is related to populations and accessibility related to that. And so those component requirements would shift and change depending on the location of the development. So hence our reason for deleting it was to avoid or take out what is actually a slightly confused sentence and replace it with something more simple and straightforward that directs straight to the standards as required.
I'll obviously go back a little further than Laura. I know why that policy was put in the first place. It was because we were losing playing fields, and because when we came to individual site applications, the size of the sites didn't justify, in a large number of cases, the provision of a playing field in areas where we had playing field deficiencies. And it was a means to try and, in effect, aggregate the collective impact of development that would justify a playing field, and a mechanism to provide how we could actually deliver that in practice. by getting the playing field on one site, and obviously some of the other provision would be greater on some of the other sites, and that was what it was intended to do.
Yep, I'll certainly consider all that. That's helpful, Mr. Merritt. Anything else on GI6? Ms. Hilton?
Thank you. Yes, so GI6 is provision of new open space and asks whether that is sound. We just have a problem with the word new because OS 10 is not new open space, as I explained earlier today. It is already open space, and the access to it with the propositions in the local plan will be the same as it is now. In other words, the existing rights of way and so on. So it's not really new, it's already there. So that's the first thing. It's also, as I probably said also, that it's best and most versatile agricultural land. And I've put a map in our hearing statement showing the quality of land in that area. And you'll see a lot of the land that are in the strategic sites around Heslington is best and most versatile. And I think it is the Natural England 25-year environment plan. It affords protection for the best agricultural land. So OS 10 should be left as agricultural land, as we've said before. Furthermore, a further loss of Grade 2 land is due to the decision to have the biodiversity net gain be above the anticipated Environment Act of 2023, which sets it at 10%. So part of the loss of the BMV Grade 2 land for mitigation is because the biodiversity net gain has been set higher than it perhaps needs to be. We have suggested some remedies such as off-site using poorer land such as Weldrake Wood for mitigation. Another remedy is to use the examples that have come from the national parks, where in this case I think industrial functions have managed to meet a compromise with the National Parks Authority about how to both operate without considerable compromise on their functions. So what we're suggesting is that the agricultural function could be mixed with the mitigation requirements. And these are the kind of agreements with the farming community which would safeguard farming enterprises while also delivering the environmental goals. And to be honest, the environmental goals are three-quarters there with the extensive period of higher stewardship that particular site has enjoyed. I noticed as well that Peak Ecology recommends removal of hedges on the OS 10 site. Well, obviously the hedges are an important habitat for biodiversity, but they also have other functions in that they are an important windbreak to preserve the soil. And they also act as a noise screen against the A64. So I think it's all part of the impression one has that open spaces are considered as parkland, and the impression that there's very little attention given to the other aspects of open space, and the agricultural land around York is, after all, part of its historical setting. And we would just like to see the agricultural land have a higher profile and be recognised as an important contribution to open spaces as it is now. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Henderson?
So, yeah, I can deal with this, I hope, quite quickly. So the first point it's essentially said, well, it's existing, why is it included in the policy? If you look at how it's described, OS10, new area for nature conservation. Just because it's going to be used for nature conservation, it's not going to be used, as I understand Ms Hilton complains about, for agriculture. So it has to be included because we're securing that change. So leave aside the merits of whether that's right or wrong. That's why it's here. I hope that can be uncontroversial. As though to the merits and the BMV point, this is a classic balancing exercise, but I fully appreciate the local concern, but when one considers matters such as BMV, you need to look at the council's area as a whole. It's not about protecting individual parcels of BMV, it's looking at the overall resource and what the effects on that resource are. To give you an example of how the council's done that, CD 8, which of course is the essay that we've looked at before, and you can see it within that in multiple places. I will give you some quick references. PDF page 17 and 18 is dealing specifically with cumulative effects, and that includes consideration of loss of BMV. Give you another reference to look at, that's on PDF page 68. Again, dealing with it holistically. PDF page 109, that's where it's been included as a specific objective within Objective 9. PDF page 145 grapples with housing and BMV. And when you get to a cumulative view overall, I ask you to look at PDF page 162 and 168. So this issue has been looked at, it's been addressed through the essay, and it's been done so on a cumulative basis, looking at the council's area as a whole, which is the proper approach to dealing with the issue of best and most versatile land.
Ms Hilton, do you want to add anything?
Just very quickly, I do fully appreciate that the local plan is the local plan for the area as a whole. I completely understand that. And I do understand that the council has a very difficult job to balance all the different needs. Of course, we're going to try and defend our corner. That is our role, just as your role is to defend your policies. I understand that too. But then if you look at the map of the land qualities that we've put in our hearing statement, I wonder if there are actually any other major land grabs, if you like, of best and most versatile agricultural land anywhere else in the local plan.
Thank you. Would you like to add anything?
No, so you've heard my submissions which deal with that, and I appreciate the questions asked about BMV, but as you go through those references I gave you, you will see that it's an issue that has cropped up and been considered in numerous locations. Which frankly,
it's something that we're going to have to, that same balancing exercise that the council has carried out, when one deals with a plan, one has to juggle all that as well. So it's not something that would be set to one side necessarily, but you have to deal with different aspects of the plan. Thank you. Anything else on this policy? Because otherwise it's GI 7. A very small modification made in it. This deals with burial and memorial grounds. Does anyone want to say anything about these? Seems not. We've cleared the room, it seems. There's hardly anybody left. But yes, I'm grateful for your help and submissions this morning. I'll draw this hearing to a close. We're back at 2 o'clock, so shortened lunch break. We'll be talking about the ins and outs of Greenbelt policy. Until then, thank you.